Final Cut Pro is finally here on the iPad. So this is a complete guide to go from beginner to pro with Final Cut Pro on the iPad. When you first open up Final Cut Pro on the iPad, you should be greeted by this screen, which is going to have a demo project labeled Lunar New Year. Here is my biggest point of advice. Open up this project, move stuff around, cut stuff, delete stuff, add in your own footage. This is going to be the very best way for you to get your hands on with Final Cut Pro, and you never even have to worry about ruining anything because it's not your project. Once you're done playing around with this project, you'll just go up to the top left-hand corner and push on this arrow icon, and that will bring you back to all of your other projects. Inside of this menu, you have several different options. If you go to the very top left and tap on this icon, in here, you're going to see stuff like your settings, and you can actually change the scroll direction from clockwise to counterclockwise. Also, you can clear your render cache. This is going to be really important if you are running out of space on your iPad. And then below that is remove all downloads. With Final Cut Pro, there are a ton of different downloads, from different titles and backgrounds to different soundtracks. So if you need to clear more space on your iPad, you can remove those downloads right here and you can re-download them later at any time. Going down to the account settings, you can actually manage your subscriptions, and then going even further down is help and support. In here, you're going to find stuff like the Final Cut Pro user guide. You're also going to find video tutorials, service and support, and finally send feedback. Now, I highly recommend that anytime you have any feedback for Apple, you use this button. Final Cut Pro is only going to get better with our feedback. So please send in some feedback to Apple to make this app the very best that it can be. After going through these menus, we can go back to all of our projects by tapping on all projects. To create a new project, go to the bottom left-hand corner and push on the add button. In here, we can rename our project to whatever we like, and we can adjust our timeline settings. Currently, it's set to automatic, which means it will take the very first clip that we drop on the timeline and create all the project settings according to that. If you know exactly what settings you want for your project, you can tap on automatic and change it over to custom. Right now, the resolution is set to 4K. I'm going to change that down to 1080p. The orientation is set to landscape. If you wanted to make a vertical project, you could tap on that and change it over to portrait. For right now, I'm just going to set it to landscape. We can also adjust the color space. By default, it's set to HDR, but I want this to be an SDR project, so I'm going to change that over to Rec 709. And finally is the frame rate. Right now, it's set to 24 frames per second, but you can go all the way up to 60 frames per second if you so desire. I'm going to leave it at 24 for right now. From there, we'll just push continue. The next window is going to ask where I want to bring in this project footage from. Now, if you don't know from the very beginning, maybe you're just working with some titles and stuff, you can actually select a blank project. You can also select record with a camera if you want to bring in footage by using the Pro Camera app that's found inside of Final Cut Pro for the iPad. Additionally, we can go to import from files, which is how I'm going to bring in my footage. If I tap on this, we can actually bring in footage from an external source. So if you had an SSD drive plugged in via USB-C, you could go ahead and access that from here. I'm going to locate my footage here from Dropbox. Now that I've found the folder with all of my footage, I can just select a singular clip and then select all, which will grab all the clips that I might want to bring in. After that, we'll go to the top right-hand corner and push open. Now that I've imported all the footage, you can see it here in the top right-hand corner. If I need to import more footage later on, we can go to the top middle and tap on this icon, and we can then select from photos or from files. Now, before we get into the project browser, I'm going to give you a quick run through of the Pro Camera app. So let's go ahead and select the camera, and in here you can see in the top left-hand corner, we have 82 hours of record time left. If we go down just a little bit, we can actually see that it's at 4K at 24 frames per second. If we want to adjust those settings, we can actually just tap on the 24, now it's 25 frames per second, up to 30, so on and so forth until we're happy. If we want to change the resolution, we can just tap on that 4K icon and change the resolution right here. Moving further down, we can actually select the zoom level. So if I tap on that 1, you'll see that we're now using the ultra wide zoom. Underneath that is the autofocus button. In here, if I tap that, I can actually set my focus to an exact level. You can also autofocus by tapping directly on the screen. Underneath that is your audio levels, and this will be a great indicator, especially if you're using an external audio source, which I'll show you how to get a little bit later on. Going below that is the settings wheel, and in here we can adjust stuff like the resolution and the frame rate. You can also enable Apple ProRes, and you can go up to 4K at 30 frames per second with Apple ProRes, or you can do 60 frames per second at 1080p. Moving further down, you can see that you can mirror the front camera, and you can also disable the shutter sound should you want to. Looking at the tools section, we can enable stuff like the grid so we can very easily line up stuff in our shot. We can also enable overexposure. If my shot had something overexposed inside of it, we would actually see zebras so that we know that it's overexposed and we can adjust our exposure accordingly. And then underneath that is the aspect ratio guide. Right now we can adjust if it has a square or a 4:3 aspect ratio guide on here, which makes it really easy for making social content. Going to the right, we can also adjust the audio settings. Right now you can see the source is set to iPad. If I had an external audio source, I could change it over to that from this menu. Moving on to the right side of the screen, if I tap on this light bulb icon, we can actually adjust the white balance. If we want a preset white balance, I can tap on this little arrow icon and adjust it to be daylight, which is 5600 Kelvin, and we can tap and drag on this slider to get it to an exact level. Underneath that is the exposure compensation. So if we want to bring up the exposure or drop it down, we can do just that with this slider. We can also reset that using the reset button. We can also enable if the flash is on our iPad, and finally we can adjust if the camera is forward facing or facing towards the back. Then of course, just underneath that is the record button, and there's also a slow-mo button. So if you want to work with slow-mo in your video, you can do just that. Once you're done recording, you can go to the top right-hand side of your screen and push done. And all of that footage that you have just recorded will already be inside of Final Cut Pro. Now that we're looking back at our project, we can take a look at the project browser. This is where you're going to be sorting through all of your media and grabbing any clips that you want for your project. I can of course scroll up and down just by tapping and dragging, and if I want to make a selection of a particular clip, I can tap on a clip and you'll see that there's actually these handles that appear at the bottom. These represent the in and out points of your clip. So if you just want a specific section of a clip, I can tap and drag on those left and right handles to get an exact portion of video. Then when I'm ready, I can just tap and drag this clip down to the timeline. But there's also several other ways that we can add clips down to the timeline. Moving to the top of the screen, you'll actually see an undo button. So I'm going to tap that to get rid of that clip. Now I'm just going to tap on whatever clip that I want to have down on the timeline. If we look in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that it currently says insert. If I tap on this down arrow, we can actually change it to be stuff like append to storyline, connect at playhead, insert at playhead, and override at playhead. I'm going to go ahead and select append to storyline. Now, if I tap on append, that is going to drop it directly on the timeline. So if I wanted to add in another clip, I could go ahead and tap append once more. If I wanted to add a clip above another clip, I could tap on that down arrow and then select connect at playhead. I'll move my playhead back a little bit and we'll add in another clip. Moving to the top side of the project browser, you'll see there are these two handles. If I tap and drag, I can actually expand and shrink down the size of the project browser, which is really nice if I need to see more footage. To the right of that is this little 3-bar icon. If I tap on that, you'll see that I can sort this by media types. So I could change it so it just shows me video clips, multicam, audio, or photos. Then I can push back. Underneath that is keywords. To add a keyword to a clip, all I need to do is select the clip, then tap on this key icon. When I do that, I can add a new keyword and I can just type in whatever I want. I'm just gonna call this medium shot. If I'm not happy with a particular keyword, I can actually go up to edit and tap on this minus icon, and that will allow me to delete it, but I wanna keep it for right now. Let's go ahead and close out of this window. Then we can go up to the 3 bars again and change it from keywords over to medium shot. So now any shots that have the keyword of medium shot are going to show up in our bin. Underneath that, we can make selections for favorites and rejected clips. To favorite a clip, I can go ahead and just tap on it and I'll push this heart icon. You'll see that it adds this green bar above it, indicating that that has been favorited. It should be noted that if I select another clip and I actually make a selection of whatever I want on that clip, then let's say I want to reject this portion, I can tap on this icon, it's the square with the line through it. It will only add that rejected portion of that specific clip. So everything else in the clip does not have any sort of tagging on it. Now then, of course, you could jump back up here and sort by favorited or rejected. One last point I'd like to make for making selections down here in the project browser is wherever the playhead is, I can go ahead and tap on these two arrow icons. If I tap on the right, that will make the right-hand side extend out to wherever the playhead is. And if I tap on the left-hand arrow, that is going to make the left-hand side extend out to wherever the playhead was. Moving to the top right-hand corner, we can actually tap on these 4 squares. In here, we can make selections like aspect ratio, so we can see the actual aspect ratio of whatever shot we have created. Tapping on that again, I'll change it back to square. Underneath that, we can enable the showing of clip names. So if you've gone through and cataloged all of your footage, this would be a great way to get a visualization in your project. I'll go ahead and hide those clip names so it's a little bit cleaner. And underneath that, we can sort by clip name, import date, capture date, duration, media type, ascending, and descending. If you want to bring in multiple clips onto your timeline, you can tap on the selection button. You'll see that it gives me this blue check mark in the bottom right-hand corner of whatever clips I've selected. So we can go to the top left and do select all if we so desired, or we can deselect all. And now I can just tap and drag to make as many selections as I need in my project browser. Then we can go ahead and tap on connect, and those will be added to our timeline. Let's go ahead and undo that for right now. Now that our media is down on the timeline, we can go ahead and take a look at the timeline. The first thing you should know is that you can pinch and drag to zoom in or zoom out, which is really handy. To move back and forth between the timeline, you can just tap and drag. To move your playhead around, you're gonna wanna tap where this ruler is on your timeline. And you can actually tap and drag to skim through your media. And if you have audio skimming enabled, you'll actually hear the audio playing back as you're skimming through. Probably the most important feature you should know about is cutting. You're gonna need to cut all over the place in your clips. To create a cut in a clip, we can go ahead and select whatever clip we want to create a cut and look at the bottom right-hand corner. The first one we'll take a look at is the rectangle with a line going through the center of it. Go ahead and tap that to create a cut. You'll see that I now have cut my clip down, and if I need to shorten or extend a certain clip, I can go ahead and just tap and drag directly on those handles to shorten or extend it out. Now, another really handy tool you're going to be using all the time on the timeline is if I select a clip and have my playhead in the middle. Let's say that I want the left-hand side of this clip to move up to where the playhead is. We can go ahead and tap on this icon where the grayed out left-hand side of the rectangle is. Once we've done that, the clip will be cut up to wherever the playhead was. Then we can move to the right side and tap on the other icon. So now we very quickly cut off any extra media that we didn't need on our timeline. To delete a clip, you'll of course just push this trash can icon. If we need to select multiple clips, tap on this checkmark icon, and in here we can select multiple clips or all of our media by tapping on select all or deselect all. From there you can use the trash can to delete it, or we can just push done. We can also tap and drag to select multiple clips by creating this nice little box here. What's really nice about this timeline is that it has all of the magnetic features that are found in the desktop version of Final Cut Pro. So what that means is if I tap and drag on this specific clip, everything is going to be consistently moving to that left-hand side. However, if you want to disable this particular feature, maybe you're not a huge fan of the magnetic timeline, you can actually go to the far right and tap on this icon with the little rectangle and 2 arrows. This is your position tool. What that means is we can tap and drag these clips to wherever we want, and Final Cut Pro will add in a gap clip. A gap clip is just completely transparent. There is nothing to that gap clip, so that you can move your clips around as much as you need. You can move them on top, and you don't have to worry about the magnetic timeline. That being said, I highly recommend that you really embrace the magnetic timeline. The magnetic timeline is the most powerful feature that Final Cut Pro has, and it is going to make you a way faster editor. Really consider trying it out. Maybe it's not for you and you still don't have to use it, but I strongly suggest that you at least give it a chance. Something that's really powerful with the magnetic timeline is I can tap on a clip and have it locked to the clip that it's over the top of. So if I had audio or something connected to this, I could tap and drag, move that to the right side, and now both clips are going to be moved together. To the left of the position tool is the snapping tool. So currently, if I tap and drag a clip, it is going to snap to that left-hand side or to the right-hand side of wherever the next cut is. If I want to disable that, I can go ahead and tap on the snapping, and now I can slide this clip to wherever I need. To the right of that is the options panel. Go ahead and tap on that, and in here you can enable or disable the position or snapping tool, and you can hide the controls on your timeline. So if you want it to be a little bit cleaner of a workspace, you can go ahead and hide those, and now they won't show up here. You'll need to jump inside of the options menu to enable or disable them. I'm going to go ahead and leave those enabled. Underneath that is the expand all clips. If we tap on this, you'll see now that each clip has a video lane and an audio lane. This is essential for creating J and L cuts. To create a J cut or an L cut, I can go ahead and tap on a specific video portion. And now I can use this handle to tap and drag, and just like that, I have created an L cut. Or likewise, if we want to create a J cut, I can slide it the other way. I can also go ahead and tap directly on the audio and extend or shorten down that particular portion, again to make a J or an L cut. Let's go ahead and tap on options and then select collapse all clips, and now those audio lanes should be hidden. However, in this instance, because I had the audio lane selected, it did not hide that. So if you need to hide the expanded audio clips, you can tap and hold, and that will give you this extra context menu. In here, we can cut and copy a specific clip, and we can render a specific portion of the timeline. So if you're having difficulty with playback on a specific portion, you can go ahead and render that out with this selection. But underneath that is the expand audio components. So by tapping that, we can now expand our audio out, or I can tap and hold again and collapse that audio clip. Down at the bottom of the options menu, we can enable or disable the skimmer playhead and audio scrubbing. The skimmer playhead is more of an option you're going to notice with the Apple Pencil or when you're using the keyboard accessory. That means that as I drag the mouse over the top of the screen, everything will skim with it. So you can disable that from the options menu. Jumping over to the appearance side of things, we can tap and drag to increase the clip height to our preference. Underneath that is the audio meters. You can enable or disable that, and that will add the audio meters here on the far right hand side, which will play back and let you know if there's any kind of peaking in your video. I'm going to go ahead and push done. If we move on over to the left hand side, you'll notice that we have different selection modes. Currently it's clip selection, so if I tap on a clip, it's going to select that entire clip. However, if we tap on this selection mode, we can change it over to the range selection. So if I need to select a specific portion of a video, I can just tap and drag on that video and it will select that specific portion. So now if I need to delete that portion of video, I can go ahead and tap on delete. It will create the cuts and everything will shift over to the left-hand side using the magnetic timeline feature. We can also change it over to the edge selection mode, which is really nice specifically when working with transitions, but we'll get into that a little later. But right now, if I tap on a clip, it is just going to select that edge. Also, we can zoom in here and I can tap on a specific cut. Then I can very easily slide that cut back and forth by using the edge selection tool. A really powerful feature that Final Cut Pro for the iPad has is the jog wheel. This is going to make your life so much easier when making a frame by frame edit. If I go to the very top right hand corner, you can select the jog wheel right up here. That is going to add in this little window, which you can tap on to expand and show the jog wheel. If the jog wheel is getting in your way, you can tap and drag to move it to a different position. You can also tap and drag to move it onto the opposite side of the screen. Another really powerful feature with the jog wheel is if we want to use the edge selection tool, we can tap on the jog wheel and go into nudge mode. By tapping this, we can now tap and drag to make a frame by frame edit on our specific clip. Now when I'm done there, I can go ahead and go back into playhead mode and just move the playhead back and forth. It will also carry momentum if I tap and drag really hard, so if you need to get around your timeline really quickly, you can go ahead and do just that. Moving from the timeline, let's take a look at the viewer. On the left-hand side of the viewer, you're gonna see three icons. You have your play icon, which is of course how you're just gonna play through your footage whenever you need to. You'll also see an icon here with an arrow pointing to a line. If we tap the left icon, that is going to take you to the previous edit point. If we tap on the right icon, that is going to take you to the next edit point on your timeline. And that includes audio edits. So if I tap this one more time, you're actually going to see that if I scroll down, we have jumped to that J cut that I made previously. When I tap on the play button, you'll notice that those two buttons on the sides have changed. We can now press fast forward to play back faster through our footage, and if we tap that a second time, we're going to play even faster. Or we can play everything in reverse by tapping on the left-hand side. Moving to the right side is your zoom controls. We can of course pinch to zoom on our specific footage, or we can use this menu here by tapping on that % icon. We can select zoom to, and we can set this to something like 400% if we want to zoom way in. Tapping on that once more, we can actually change it to actual size. This is the actual size that the footage was shot at, so that you can get a good idea of what the resolution is going to look like on your screen. Tapping on that once more, we can change it to fit to canvas. So now the canvas is going to always auto fit whatever size that is. So if I tap and drag to make the timeline larger or smaller, you'll see how that is shrinking and expanding. To the right of that are our viewer preferences. I'm going to tap on this and we can actually jump into full screen. At the bottom, you'll see that your playback controls are there, but you can also double tap in the middle to press play or pause. You can also double tap on the right-hand side to jump forward 15 seconds, or double tap on the left side to jump back 10 seconds. To exit full screen mode, you'll just go to the bottom right-hand corner and tap on the full screen button. Now we can tap on this menu once more and jump into picture-in-picture mode. This mode is really cool. It's going to throw your viewer in a really tiny window that you can move around on the screen by tapping and dragging on it. This will give you an expanded view of your project media browser. So if you're not 100% worried about the visuals of your shot and you just need to get media down on the timeline, this can be a really great way to do that. Once you're done with picture-in-picture mode, we can go ahead and tap on the lower right-hand icon and select Exit Picture-in-Picture. Tapping on that icon once more, we can change the viewer background. We'll put the playhead in a point where there is no media. We can change the viewer background from black over to white, or even to checkerboard. This is a great way of verifying if you have any sort of alpha channel on your particular clip. We can also adjust the playback. Right now, I have it set to performance. Underneath that is our guides. By tapping on that, we can enable or disable various guides that we might need. For example, we could enable the center and horizon line. We can also enable the safe area, which is really helpful for broadcast media. At the top, we can enable or disable snap to edges and snap to center. Finally, underneath that is our video scopes. Right now it's set to off. We can change it to enable the waveform, the vector scope, or of course the histogram. This is going to be really essential when you're doing any kind of coloring workflow in Final Cut Pro. The next area we can take a look at is the inspector, and you are going to be spending a lot of time in your inspector. So I'm going to select a clip, then jump down to the bottom left-hand corner and select the inspector mode. In here, you are going to see so many different options. Going from the top, we can see that we can change the clip speed. If you wanted your clip to be at something like 400%, we could tap and drag to make that happen. We could also tap directly on this percentage number and type in 400% and push enter. I'm going to go ahead and reset that by tapping on reset. Underneath that is the retime duration. This is really helpful if you have a clip that needs to be an exact amount of time on your timeline. So for example, if I want this clip to be 2 seconds in time, I'm going to tap on that and type in 2 seconds. We can go ahead and tap 00 and then push enter. So now that clip has been retimed down to 2 seconds, which will figure out that it needed to be sped up to 717%. Underneath that is your video quality settings. Right now it's set to normal or floor. Honestly, I'm not an expert in this. I'm not sure exactly what it's doing there, but then there's also nearest frame and frame blending. If you're having any sort of issues with how your retiming is looking on your timeline, I strongly suggest that you try playing around with these. It should be noted that optical flow is not on the iPad version of Final Cut Pro. I hope that that gets added someday, but at this very moment, it is not there. You'll also see that we can enable or disable the preserve audio pitch option. This means that if I were to speed up a clip, it would get much higher in its frequency
because of how the audio of that clip is sped up.
However, if we want the tone of that audio to remain the same, then we can enable preserve audio pitch. It should be noted this is on by default. So if you want the audio of a clip that's slowed down to 10% to sound like it's been slowed down to 10%, go ahead and disable that option. You can also reverse the playback of a specific clip. So just by checking this box, now everything in that clip is going to play in reverse. Finally, at the bottom, you can insert a freeze frame. So if you need to add a freeze frame into your video, go ahead and find the specific portion that you want, tap on your clip speed and select insert freeze frame. that is going to create a freeze frame right here on your timeline, which you can apply different effects to as you need. Now, one last thing I would like to note with the retime editor is the inability to do any sort of speed ramping at this time. Right now, you just have to create a cut, set your speed to whatever speed you want, and have a hard cut into that specific speed. I'm going to go ahead and go to the top right and select done to get out of that menu. And underneath, you will see the opacity slider. This is really handy for compositing. So if I had a clip and I want to have it slightly transparent over the top of everything, I can tap to drag and set that opacity to a different level. We can also change the blend mode. So right now it's set to normal. We could set this to a mode like Stencil Luma to get various different looks on our specific clips. Underneath that is the color conversion. Right now it's set to automatic, and most times you're gonna wanna leave that there. However, if you need to choose it manually, you can do just that, and you can get various different HDR workflows right here in Final Cut Pro on the iPad. Then underneath that is your rate conversion. This has to do if you're working with a frame rate in a specific clip that is different than whatever your project frame rate is. So if you had a 24 frame per second clip on a 60 frame per second timeline, this is telling Final Cut Pro how you want to deal with those extra frames. If you're not happy with all of the changes you've just done and you don't want to go through and manually reset those, you can tap on these 3 dots right here. In here, we can reset the format settings by tapping on this button. We can also go in here and select copy all settings and paste format settings. So if you want to apply these exact same settings to another clip, this is how you would do just that. You'll notice that all of my clips have been shot in a log profile. If I want to correct for that, all I will need to do is select the clip up inside of my project browser, and you'll see all of these additional settings here on the left side with the inspector. I can verify the frame size, color profile, all those necessary different things, but I can also adjust the log processing. Currently it's set to none. Let's go ahead and set that to Sony S-Log S-Gamut 3 Cine. That will apply the proper transform LUT to that specific clip so I don't have to go through and adjust stuff like contrast with the color tools in Final Cut Pro. One last thing I want to cover inside of the inspector is if you want to change a specific audio roll on a clip, you can select it, then go to the top right-hand corner and tap on this eye. In here, we can change the audio roll from dialogue over to effects or music. Moving over to the transform tools, these are just like the transform tools in Final Cut Pro, but it's really nice because we have a tactile surface to work with. So I can actually tap and drag directly on my clip in the top right corner to scale it up, or I can tap directly on the clip to move it around in the frame. We can also tap on this circle to rotate the clip as needed. Moving underneath that, we can actually see that we have specific values we can apply to these. So if I wanted to set this directly to 50%, I could just type in 50% and then push enter. So now that clip has been scaled down to 50%. Then underneath that is lock proportions. So if I want to lock that it's 100% scale on both axes, I could do that, but by disabling that, I can now scale it up or scale it down on a different axis. Underneath that is the auto resize. If I had a vertical timeline with 16:9 footage, you'll see how the whole clip has been squeezed down to fit inside of that box. But we can actually change it from scale to fit over to scale to fill, and now that is going to fill up the entire frame. There's also some other really useful features when working with vertical timelines here on the iPad. Before I get into those tools though, I want to take a look at the anchor point. Right now it's set to center. We can add specific values if we so desire for the anchor point, or we can tap on this center and change the anchor point position just by using these different presets. Moving down is our crop tools. By tapping on that, you'll have your basic crop tool. So I can just tap and drag directly on here to crop a specific clip. I'll go ahead and reset that, and the next crop tool is the Ken Burns tool. In here, you'll see that there is a green box and a red box. The green box is your starting point, and the red box is your ending point. By adding on the Ken Burns tool, Final Cut Pro will automatically animate a zoom on your shot. So if I wanted to create a nice little zoom here, I'll just adjust the different points. Maybe we'll zoom way in, and I can just tap and drag this box to wherever I want to zoom in to. Then we can go ahead and back out of the crop tools. It should be noted that the Ken Burns tool is going to work over the entire duration of the clip. So if we want to speed up the zoom, we're going to need to shorten our clip way down. Now I can go ahead and push play. Now the last cropping tool is extremely helpful for vertical content, and I really hope it's a feature that's added onto the desktop version, and that is auto crop. Selecting auto crop, we can go ahead and select start scan. Final Cut Pro will automatically analyze all of the frames of a scene and figure out what is the main subject of that scene. It will then auto-animate that particular scene so that everything is directly in the middle of your shot. However, it should be noted that if I push play right now, it's going to get a little bit crazy. So if I want to fix that, I need to jump out of the crop tools and change the scale from scale to fill over to scale to fit. Now if I push play, we should get a good idea of what Final Cut Pro's auto crop tool is doing. And finally, at the bottom of your transform panel is the distort tools. You can just tap on that and then tap and drag on a specific corner to get a different perspective on your shot. Moving from the transform panel, we can go over to the audio settings. In here, the first thing you're gonna see is the volume offset. This is really nice if you have a clip that is way too quiet. You can adjust the offset up to 12 decibels. This is not going to affect the actual audio on your timeline. This is affecting the audio specifically on the clip, which means that in our timeline, we can adjust the audio another 12 decibels. So this is so handy, specifically if you have a shot that's just too quiet. We can also adjust the pan on our audio. So we can adjust it from the left side to the right side of the screen, depending on what you want with your specific stereo audio. Underneath that is the fade in and fade out options. Normally in Final Cut Pro, we have nice little handles on each of our clips to click and drag for our audio fades. However, in Final Cut Pro on the iPad, you're gonna need to adjust that right here. So I'll tap on audio fade and we can tap and drag to adjust this fade as much as we need. And you'll notice here on the timeline that has actually added a nice little handle onto our clip. We can also change the transition type. Right now it's +3 dB. We could change it over to an S curve if we so desired, and then tap out of that. Underneath that is settings like voice isolation, loudness, and noise removal. And that means that Final Cut Pro is going to use its machine learning to apply voice isolation to get your voice sounding as clear as possible, even if there is a lot of background noise. The loudness filter is going to level out your audio. So it's going to take the quiet portions of your clip and make them louder, or your loud portions of your clip and flatten them down in volume. And finally is noise removal. This is very similar to the voice isolation tool. However, it's not quite as focused on making the human voice sound as good as possible. It's more of a general noise removal tool. Underneath that, you're going to see the audio effects panel. If you need to add specific effects onto your clip, you can go ahead and tap on this plus icon. Right now, all you're gonna see is two different effects in this specific place. You can add a single band EQ and a compressor. If you want more audio effects, you're gonna find those up in your project browser, which we'll get into in a little bit. Moving from this panel, we can go over to the effects panel. And again, we can tap on this add icon to add in stuff like our masks and keying, our color adjustments, blur, distort, and stylize filters. However, if you want even more effects, you're gonna find those over in the effects browser on the right-hand side, which again, we'll get into in just a little bit. If I wanted to add in a color adjustments, I could tap on color adjustments, then jump inside of here. Now we can adjust stuff like the exposure, the contrast, the brightness, the saturation, the highlights, black point, shadows, and the warmth and tint on your highlights, your midtones, and your shadows. And then finally, we can adjust the mix slider. If you wanted to add a specific mask onto this color adjustment, we could select add mask. Now, if we want to change how that mask is looking, we can tap directly on the mask and then tap to drag it wherever we need inside of our browser. It should be noted that the object tracker is not in this version of Final Cut Pro, so you won't be able to tap and drag your color adjustments onto somebody's face and have that track really easily. You're gonna need to add in your keyframes manually. One new feature that I really want to cover is how to use the brand new scene removal mask. And you use this when you want to remove the background of a specific shot. To do this, you'll just want to push on this plus icon next to effects, go to masks and keying, and then select scene removal mask. And you'll see that Final Cut Pro has gone through, analyzed the shot, and removed the background for me, and it's done a really good job on this specific shot. However, something that I would like to note is that you really need to follow the given requirements for this to work its very best. You can find those requirements by tapping on the scene removal mask in your effects, and in here you'll see that the requirements are to use a video with a static background captured using a stationary camera, so on a tripod. And you're also going to want to capture a few frames of the background without the subject at the beginning or the end of the video. This is super important to get this to work to the very best of its ability, because I personally have found that if I haven't followed these given requirements, the background removal has not worked very well. That said, this is a really exciting starting point, and I can't wait to see what future updates do for this specific feature. To get out of the scene removal mask, we can just tap on this arrow to get back into our effects viewer. Also, if you ever want to delete an effect or to disable it, you can just swipe to the left-hand side, and in here you'll see that we can disable it by tapping on that eye, or we can completely delete it by clicking on the trash can. So now that we've looked at the inspector, we can go ahead and take a look at the titles, backgrounds, and generators that are found inside of Final Cut Pro on the iPad. Moving on over to the far right-hand corner, you're going to see this icon that has a star and a circle. Tapping on that, you can see all of these different effects that come inside of Final Cut Pro, as well as different audio effects by tapping on this tab. Going into the video effects, if I scroll down, you'll see that some of these have a cloud icon. That means I need to download those effects. Again, at the beginning of this video, I showed how to remove those downloads. If you want to download something, you can tap on that cloud icon, or you can tap on a specific effect that has not yet been downloaded, and Final Cut Pro will automatically download it really quickly for you to use. To apply a specific effect, you'll just select the effect, then in the bottom right-hand corner, you can select Apply. You can also just tap and drag on an effect and add it to your timeline, just like so. And it should be noted that all of the effect settings that you might need will be found over in your inspector on the left side, so you can tap inside of those and adjust each of these given settings as you need. To apply a transition, you can just tap and drag that transition directly onto a cut point. We can also select the clip that we might want, select the transition that we want, then in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that it currently says Add to Start. You can tap on this down arrow and select Add to Both, Add to Start, or Add to End, depending on your preferences. Let's go ahead and select Add to End, and then I'll tap to add that. It might bring up this window that says the transition will cause clips to overlap, shortening your timeline. This is a very common thing that happens in Final Cut Pro. To get around that, you could actually tap and drag a specific clip to shorten it, and that will provide us with enough room for the transition to work. So again, I'll just select that, select the transition I want, and then select Add to End. And now that transition has been added to the timeline. We could zoom in here, tap on the transition, and then we can tap and drag on the handles to increase the duration of that transition. It should also be noted that you'll have a whole bunch of settings over here on the left-hand side with the inspector, so if you need to adjust stuff like coloring or timing, you can do just that. Jumping into the titles, these work just like titles in Final Cut Pro, but there are a whole bunch of new and exciting titles that they have added for Final Cut Pro on the iPad, as well as transitions and backgrounds and even soundtracks. To add a title, you'll just tap and drag it down here onto the timeline. Again, we can jump into the inspector on the left side, go into this camera icon, and in here we can adjust stuff like the text. So if we want this to say something different, we could jump inside of there. I'll go ahead and clear that out and write whatever I like. Then we can scroll down and adjust stuff like the font, the color, all caps, everything you could possibly need in here. We'll back out of here, and then you'll notice that there have been some animation styles that have been added. Currently, it's set to none. We could change that over to something like slide right. So now if I push play, that title is going to slide into our scene, and it's going to have some really nice easing added to it, which I really, really love. We can adjust how long the duration is by looking at all of these different sliders here at the bottom. There have been a ton of different titles that have been added, so I strongly suggest that you go ahead and look through and find the ones that really work with your specific branding. Jumping into the backgrounds, these are brand new to Final Cut Pro. These are normally called generators inside of Final Cut, but in here they are referred to as backgrounds, and they are all so beautiful to look at. For example, we could apply this Atom 1, and I'll go ahead and select Append, and that will add it to the end of my timeline. You'll see that we have these really gorgeous colors, and we could add a title over the top of this to really get it to pop for our specific video. There's also this new menu for objects. If we scroll on down, we can find stuff like shapes, but there's also these different social media icons. So if you wanted to add a like button onto your video, you could tap and drag that directly onto your timeline, and just like that, we have this beautiful little animation of a thumb popping up. We could of course jump into the transform tools, shrink it down, and then we could tap and drag it down to the bottom left hand corner to remind you that you should really like this video. And finally, we have soundtracks. Soundtracks are really cool and they're a brand new feature inside of Final Cut Pro. What we need to do to add these is tap and drag them down onto the timeline. Then, if we want this soundtrack to apply to the exact duration of our video clip, I can go ahead and move the playhead forward to the end of our video, and I'll just tap on this icon in the lower right-hand corner to trim it all the way down. What Final Cut Pro will automatically do is figure out how long the song needs to be to fill out that space, and it's going to make all of the necessary edits. So again, if I were to shorten this way down, you'll notice how Final Cut Pro has adjusted the audio of our clip. Then we can tap and drag to make it way longer, so on and so forth. This is really powerful and it's going to vastly speed up your editing workflow if you use the songs that are already found in Final Cut Pro. So now that we've added this song onto our video, we need to adjust the actual volume of it. That is where you're going to find this volume mode at the bottom of our screen in the left-hand corner. Go ahead and tap on volume and you'll see that adds a nice little slider handle for you on the left side. To adjust how loud a clip is, we tap and drag up and down to make it louder or quieter. But if you have a specific portion of your video where you have dialogue talking over the top of your music, you may want to lower the volume in that specific portion. To do that, we can move our playhead to the point where we want to add in that keyframe and look at the bottom right-hand corner. I'm going to tap on this add keyframe icon, then we can move further forward into our clip. We can tap to add another keyframe, and now I can go ahead and just tap and drag to bring the volume up or down for that specific portion. Then if you wanted to raise the volume, you would add another keyframe, and then we could go forward one more, tap to add one more keyframe, and then drag it back up. So just like that, we've done a little bit of audio ducking. However, I am extremely lazy and I don't want to have to add 4 keyframes every single time I need to lower the volume on a clip. What we can do is go ahead and delete all these keyframes. I'll press on this minus icon. We'll push this back arrow to go back one more keyframe, delete that, so on and so forth until all these keyframes are completely deleted. What we can do is change the selection mode from keyframe over to the range selection tool. Now I can just tap and drag anywhere on this music and lower the volume, and Final Cut Pro will automatically add in the necessary keyframes to make the audio go lower in that specific portion. This is going to save you so much time, and it's one of my favorite features with Final Cut Pro on the desktop. The next feature is the Animate mode. So let's go ahead and tap that at the bottom left-hand side, and in here we can go into the inspector. If we want to add a specific animation onto a clip, we can select that clip so it shows up in the inspector, then we can go over to the transform tools. If we wanted to add some keyframes for scale on a given clip, what we need to do is go into Animate mode and find this little gray bar at the bottom. Right now, it's going to adjust the opacity. So if we want to change that, we'll tap on opacity and change it over to scale, and we'll just select scale all. Now I can move back in time, tap to add a keyframe in the bottom right-hand corner, move forward in space, and tap to add another keyframe. Now we can adjust the scale to whatever we want. So we'll just adjust it to 150% and push enter. So now we've added a nice little zoom animation onto this specific clip. We could also adjust stuff like the opacity like it originally had. So we could go ahead, tap to add a keyframe. We'll go into our video inspector and drop the opacity down to 0. We can move forward, and then I can go ahead and just drag up the opacity, and Final Cut Pro will automatically add in the necessary keyframe so that I don't need to push the add keyframe button in the bottom right hand corner every single time I need to make an adjustment. Also, one really quick tip, if you need to move around a keyframe, go ahead and enable the jog wheel. In here we can actually see that there's both the playhead mode but also the keyframe mode. So now I can move around this keyframe frame by frame by using the jog wheel, which is much simpler rather than deleting a keyframe and then re-adding it and reanimating it. The last mode in the bottom left-hand corner is the Multicam editor, and this is one of the most powerful features that Final Cut Pro for the iPad has. We can go ahead and just tap on that Multicam mode, and because I've already added a Multicam, we can actually see the 2 different angles I have here. I have one angle for my audio and one angle for my video. So you don't always have to use this with multiple video sources. You can just use it to sync up your audio with your video. It should be noted that you only get 4 tracks with your multicam in Final Cut Pro on the iPad. To create a new multicam, you're just going to want to go up to your project browser and get into your selection mode. I'm going to select my video and my audio clip. Then in the bottom left-hand corner, we can tap on this multicam icon. In here, we can rename this to whatever we like, and we can adjust the format and video settings, but I'm just gonna leave it at automatic for right now. We'll tap on create, and that will automatically go through and sync all of the footage from the multicam to the audio that I recorded separately. You'll see in my project browser, I have this clip that has 4 multicam windows in the bottom left-hand corner. That indicates that this is a multicam item. You can add this to your timeline just like any other clip, by tapping and dragging or by using the append button in the bottom right hand corner. With the multicam down on the timeline, we can edit it just like any other clip. So I could create a whole bunch of cuts. Now that I've created those cuts, maybe I want to make changes to whatever the clips were inside of the multicam, possibly for color adjustments or just other effects that we might want to use. To do that, we can tap and hold on a multicam clip, and you'll see in our context menu that we have this edit angles button. Go ahead and tap on that. In here, you're gonna see a nice little preview window of your clip on the left-hand side. You'll also notice the speaker in the bottom left-hand corner. That allows you to enable or disable a different audio track so that while you're previewing it, you can get a good idea of how the audio sounds. If I wanted to add color adjustments onto a given clip, I could tap on that clip and then go over into the effects menu. Let's go ahead and apply the color adjustments effect. Then in the top right, you'll notice there is one extra icon. If I tap that, this is actually the inspector that we were working with earlier. So you can make all your basic adjustments like you would normally, but we can jump inside of the effects browser and we could adjust the colors of the specific clip as needed. So maybe I want to raise the exposure a bit, add some more contrast and brightness. At the time of making this tutorial, I'm not aware of a way to actually expand the view on that given clip. That would be a really nice feature to get down the road so that if we needed to make color adjustments, we could do it all from inside the multicam editor. But right now, this is a really great way to save yourself a bunch of time from needing to apply the same effect to different clips across your entire timeline. We could also do the same thing with the audio. We could apply compressors and equalizers as we needed them. That way we don't need to paste them across our entire timeline. Before I jump out of here, you'll also notice in the bottom left-hand corner, there is an add angle button. If for some reason you forgot to sync up a specific angle, you can go ahead and tap on that add angle button, and then you can drop that footage in by using your project browser on the right-hand side and just tap and drag it directly into that section. Then if you needed to, you could tap on that specific clip and press sync in the bottom left corner, and Final Cut Pro will automatically sync up that given clip, making it so your multicam is ready to go. You could also tap on this little arrow next to each of the names to rename a specific angle. And lastly, if you're not happy with a specific angle, you can go ahead and tap on that arrow next to the name and then select delete angle, and that will completely remove it. Once you're done with your multicam editing, you can go to the top right-hand corner and push done. And you'll notice that all of the edits that I made inside of that multicam edit have been applied here on my timeline, even though I had created a cut previously. I didn't need to paste any effects, they were just already applied, saving me that many more steps. Now what we can do on this timeline is select the multicam mode, and you'll see all 3 angles that we added inside of the multicam editor. If we scroll forward and we want to create a cut, all we need to do is just tap on it and that cut will be created. Now these are the same exact clips, but you can see the difference because one has the color adjustments and one doesn't. If we wanted to, we could cut over to just the audio sequence. Then we can cut over to the video sequence. So this would make a lot more sense if I had different video clips for this multicam edit. You'll also notice in the bottom left-hand thumbnail of each of these clips, there is a little icon. If I want to solo the audio from a specific clip, so I want this specific clip to be putting out audio for the entire timeline, we can go ahead and tap on that little circle and S. Currently it is set to solo. So that means that even though I'm making cuts, the same audio source is going to be playing throughout all of the edits. If we want to, we could change it to auto switch. So maybe you have a shot on one person and then a shot on another person and you're cutting back and forth and you want their given audio for that. You could do just that. You can also tap on here and you could enable or disable a specific audio portion depending on your needs. Now I want this to actually solo the audio for all of these clips, so I'm going to change this over to solo on that middle audio portion, and you'll notice how it has automatically disabled the audio on the other 2 clips. In the top right hand corner, you'll notice that it is set to split and switch. This is the mode you're likely going to be using the most often. However, you can change that over to switch only. What that means is that if you've already created a whole bunch of cuts on your timeline, but you need to actually swap out a few of the shots, I can now scroll forward, and if I tap on a different angle, it's going to change all of the media found within those cuts. That way, we didn't create another cut here on the timeline, it's gone ahead and just replaced it with that specific angle. The last new and exciting feature that I want to cover here in this video is the new live drawing feature. Now, you can use just your finger to use the live drawing feature, but it works especially well with the Apple Pencil. I'm going to go ahead and tap on the live drawing feature at the top middle. It looks very similar to the Photos markup icon, and at the bottom, you'll see all of these different controls that I have access to. We could of course change it over to marker mode, change the color here on the right hand side. We could add in rulers or erasers, and we could go ahead and tap on these three dots for even more options. So we could have it auto minimize or draw it with finger. If you're worried about your hand kind of rubbing up against the screen and adding additional lines that you didn't intend for, you can go ahead and disable that. I'll go ahead and leave it enabled for right now. We also have the hover preview. So that means that if I have the Apple Pencil, we can see a preview of what this specific brush is going to look like as I hover over the top of it. So if I were to write something on the screen just like so, we could then go up to the top right hand corner and push done. This is going to add that live drawing feature directly onto the timeline as an additional layer. So we can go ahead and tap on that live drawing and use it just like a title. We could extend the duration of it or shorten down the duration. But another really incredible feature is this will auto animate. So if I go back to the beginning and push play, you'll see how it auto animates in a really nice way. We can also go ahead and select the live drawing and go to the inspector. And in here on the left side, you'll see that we have the option to change how long the duration of that drawn animation is. So if I want it to be way longer, we could go ahead and drag that way out. And so now the animation is going to be much, much slower. So we have edited together our complete masterpiece here on the iPad. It is time to share it with everybody. To share it, you're just gonna tap on the share icon in the top middle, and in here we can select video, audio only, current frame, or Final Cut Pro for iPad project. These are pretty self-explanatory. Let's go ahead and go to the video mode. In here, we can adjust whether it includes video and audio, or if you just want video, you can change that right there. We can scroll further down and adjust the preset for export quality. Right now it is set to default, but we could change it over to something like high quality. High quality is going to be at Apple ProRes 422 HQ. This file size is going to be massive. You're likely going to need to either choose smaller file size or social platforms. But if you want even more granular control over your export settings, you can change the video codec. Right now it's H.264, which is a really great codec to work with, or you could change it over to HEVC. Underneath that, you can change the resolution, you can change the file type from MP4 over to MOV, and finally we can change the color space from SDR over to HDR if we were working with an HDR project. Once you've done that, you'll just tap on the export button. And then once it is completed, it will provide you with this window. Here you can airdrop the file, you could text it, you could go ahead and email it, or you could just save it to your photos by tapping on save video. Once you are done editing with your project, you can go to the top left-hand corner and tap on this arrow, and that will allow you to back out. If you wanted to duplicate your timeline so that later if you wanted to make sweeping changes and you weren't sure how they were going to work out and you wanted a backup, all you would need to do is tap on this little down arrow next to the name of your timeline and then tap on these three dots. In here we can select duplicate, and that is going to completely duplicate that project. But also, if you wanted to add a timeline that didn't have any of the edits, we could tap on the add button. This will be huge because it will retain all of the project media that you imported, but it won't retain any of the editing you've done. That way you're not duplicating the project media library size by adding a whole new project. So that is a complete guide to Final Cut Pro on the iPad. If there were any tips that I missed, please share them down below in the comments. We are all learning this software together and it's really an exciting time. If this video was helpful to you, consider pressing the like button, consider subscribing, and you might be interested in checking out this video which is my complete review of what I think Final Cut Pro on the iPad is like as a professional editor. With that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I cannot wait to see you in the next one.